Adisa, for the last hour we've been discussing, or you've been telling me about the empowerment, but I want to know about the student of empowerment. During the empowerment process, what type of personal guidelines should a student have, or does a student have, for the empowerment process?
Student of empowerment is not like any other student in the classical sense of what we believe to be the learning process or education as it exists today. A student of empowerment is a student of life, and therefore the classroom is the environment. The classroom is everything that happens and works with and integrates through that individual. So the first commitment that a student of empowerment should have is a commitment to the process. That is, that I do seek to become empowered, that I do seek the improvement of my life, that I do seek prosperity, growth, development, fulfillment. In essence, if we were to clarify the empowerment goal could be classified simply as the science of fulfillment. That unless one obtains happiness, fulfillment, then one cannot claim to be fully empowered. Because it is through empowering ourselves that we draw to ourselves happiness and fulfillment. By this, we must clearly understand that to be an empowered individual is to have clearly defined objectives and goals and desires. And when I say desires, I'm not talking about desires that may be injurious or harmful to the individual, and that is what we may call lower desires. Lust, for example, would be a lower desire, or simply trying to obtain wants as opposed to needs. So if an individual is seeking the fulfillment of their desires, they will obtain fulfillment and happiness in life. Through that, they are becoming the empowered individual. And each step that they make along that path is the commitment to empowerment. So, to clearly state it again, if a student of empowerment is to be a student, they must be a student of life, and they must be a student of the science of fulfillment. They must commit themselves to succeed. They must commit themselves to fulfill their life calling, their life mission, their life work. So in the empowerment process, we are basically saying that everyone is a leader. Everyone is a teacher. Everyone is everything. And this is clearly what we mean by Christ empowerment. That to be a Christ, an enlightened being, is to be all and everything. I was almost going to say all that you can be, and then I remembered that that means Marines. And Marines aren't all what we call empowered people. They may have some power, but that power may be kind of subject to the Defense Department and the sergeant or the lieutenant or whoever is above you. That is what we call the hierarchy of power, and that is something that once you're empowered, you oppose. You oppose any force that tries to control you or puts their authority over you. No one has the right to impose their will upon another. All that one can do is serve others, help others, assist others, advise others, counsel others, but no one should judge or control or manipulate another human being.
Is fulfillment relative?
By that you mean?
By that I mean, I hear you say that the student through empowerment, the process of empowerment, will fulfill his calling, do his best, be happy, achieve his happiness. But earlier, I heard you state something that's not necessarily exactly the same, as I'm perceiving it, not exactly the same. And I ask, is fulfillment / happiness relative to each person? Earlier you stated that each person, by empowerment, through empowerment, will achieve certain things, or can achieve certain things. And that no two persons are the same. And even with empowerment, each person will go off into their own goals. So through the process of empowerment, let's say we have a group of students there. If I were a student, would my fulfillment or my happiness be relative to someone else's? My partner, my lover, my husband, my wife, my whatever?
Your empowerment is unique to you. Your fulfillment is unique to you. Therefore, you have control over yourself and no one else. You do not have control over a lover, over a wife, a husband, a mate, any other human being. You only have control over yourself. To the extent that you control yourself well, you can have an effect on someone else. To the effect that you control yourself well is to the extent you can have a contribution to society. If you can maximize the fulfillment of your own desires and the fulfillment of your own happiness, you become an asset to society. You become a contributor to society. It is when you are unfulfilled and unhappy that you become a burden on society, because society must take care of you in some way. If you are unhappy and unfulfilled, society must take care of you because you might be unemployed, you might be on drugs, you might be an alcoholic, you might be uneducated, you might be illiterate, you might need counseling, you might need tutoring, you might need services of friends, family, you might become dependent on your mother, your father. You may always be in a position where you become a burden on society or the family or something, because you have not empowered yourself. You have not placed yourself in a position where you have fulfilled yourself and have obtained your desires and therefore have become happy. So if an individual is a student of empowerment, their goal clearly is to empower the self, to realize the self, to know the self, to empower the self to the extent that the self becomes fulfilled, happy, that the self obtains its desires, its goals in life. That can be done certainly in partnership with other individuals. This is the collective nature of society, that in fact individuals can come collectively together and fulfill certain goals in unison, can work together. But we must always understand that one person's interpretation of a goal is clearly different from another's, and therefore when people come together, inevitably there will be conflict and disagreement over how to obtain the goal, how to work with the goal, no matter how harmonious the initial relationships may be. So it is true also in personal relationships, that when two people come together as mates, lovers, husband, wife, friends, whatever, there is the basis for a relationship in harmony, but there is also the basis for disharmony, because No two individuals can share the exact same fulfillment, the exact same happiness, the exact same goals in life. Therefore, there's the grounds for disharmony. In order to affirm the relationship and have a successful relationship, both individuals must be willing to accept that they respect the basis of each of them becoming empowered and each of the individuals fulfilling their own desires and fulfilling their own path, and that one simply becomes supportive of each other's desires, goals, and fulfillment. Part of that fulfillment may be the relationship itself, and that's why two individuals may come together, because they feel that that relationship is fulfillment for them.
What can a student expect to achieve through empowerment?
Happiness.
Which makes it all relative. Huh?
Happiness and fulfillment. And I know this may sound like bliss talk, like come follow this guru and you'll obtain bliss and after 10 years of meditation or whatever. But practically speaking, the goal of empowerment is to bring one to a state of fulfillment. Now, many people often question me on this critically, this particular question, because they know that I've been struggling with empowerment principles my entire life, and I teach them. They often ask, Adisa, how come, if this is all true, how come you yourself don't seem to be empowered? You don't seem to have everything the way you want it in life. You seem to be going through life aimlessly sometimes, looking for this source in yourself. And I say very honestly and frankly to people that that is a sign that they don't understand what empowerment is, and they need to come and understand the principles. Because to understand the principles of empowerment is to understand that one obtains fulfillment when one has realized one's desires, one's goals. It is the struggle to obtain those goals that is the purpose of empowerment. But when the goal of empowering, when the goal of fulfillment, when the goal of the desires is to serve someone else and not serve the interests of the self, then one will find the most extreme difficulties and hardships in one's life. The best way to give you the example of this is to say that anyone who does selfless work, selfless service, the examples in history would be Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Christ, anyone who sacrifices the self, in other words, gives up the fact that they want to empower for their own fulfillment, for their own happiness, for their own desires. But they give that up and say, I want to make other people happy. I want to see other people fulfilled, and I'm willing to give up that personal obtainment in order to see it happen for others. When you take that path, then your own empowerment is through suffering, through the elements of giving up the self, sacrificial, if you will. Therefore, throughout history, we have had some of the greatest advancements come through this mechanism. Some of the greatest leaps in thought, in society, have come from individuals who have sacrificed themselves for the benefit of others. So one of the greatest things one can do in life is to sacrifice for others. It's noble, but it's not for everyone. And it's certainly not encouraged, because if everyone gave up any interest in the self for the good of humanity, then we'd have a world of people who were sacrificing, but we'd have no one who could benefit because nobody would be concerned about themselves.
Everybody's named Joe.
Right.
Okay.
So we can see that there's a place for everyone in the world. There's a place for Adisa, and there's a place for everyone else. So the role that I play often seems contradictory, seems to be inconsistent with what I teach. The fact that I don't have all the luxuries in life, the things that people view as success, may indicate to them that empowerment doesn't work for me. But it does work for me to the degree to which I'm able to serve.
That goes back to again my question earlier of what is relative. And if someone views the empowerment process and you as an example, and they see you are not materialistically quote unquote empowered, is it because it's simply, again, the person's view, what a person views as fulfillment and happiness, one that being on the level of spiritual, one being on the level of physical, monetarily? Is that correct? Is that a correct assumption?
The correct assumption would be that everyone has a different understanding of what makes them happy. The question is whether they have chosen two ingredients to make that analysis. One is proper knowledge, two is right action. If they have used those as the prerequisites, then they have done it from a basis of rational science, and they have obtained a position in life which clearly works for them. However, if the individual says, what makes me happy is having all the ice cream and cake I can eat every day. Well, that may make that person happy for 2 days, and after that they'll get very sick, they'll get obese, they'll have problems with their heart, their kidneys, their liver, and all kinds of things will result from eating nothing but ice cream and cake. But if that's what made them happy, certainly there's a validity to that that's what makes them happy, but it's also what destroyed them. So if they had proper knowledge, they would understand that they have to eat some protein and other foods to balance out the ice cream and cake. They can have ice cream and cake occasionally, but they have to have food to sustain themselves. They would also then, at that point, take right action, which is they would eat a balanced diet, occasionally having cake and ice cream, which is what makes them happy. It is this kind of process that we see take place in a person who understands the empowerment principles.
When you say that, and you give that explanation, what I hear you saying is, with empowerment, that being proper knowledge, right action, that one understands limitations.
One understands limitations, one understands detachment, not to become attached to the things that they seek as desires, fulfillment, but to maintain a state of detachment, and thereby overcoming the addiction or the feeling that whatever it is that I'm seeking in life has control over me. I have control over it. So these become the more difficult aspects of empowerment, and why empowerment training takes a long time. You know, we're not talking about becoming empowered in 24 hours. We're talking about a lifelong process that for most individuals, your whole life will be consumed with empowering yourself. Beginning to define, see who you are, what you really are, all these elements. The problem in our society as it exists now is people have lost this science. They've lost the desire or the ability to empower themselves. They've been programmed for slavery. They've been programmed for second-class citizenry. And they've been programmed for failure, for accepting second best, second fiddle. So until we awaken consciousness, until we awaken the consciousness and say that there is this principle, that you can be this mighty instrument of change, okay, then one can work with principles that are lifelong in nature, and those principles can become a process of training. So as I conduct empowerment programs, empowerment intensives, my goal is to work with people to give them the principles, but it's not enough to just say have proper knowledge and right action. because then people will indicate to themselves, well, what is proper knowledge, and how do I get it, and what does it do, and so there's a necessity for the individual to make self-inquiry, to begin a process of educating the self.
You spoke of consciousness. Once a student achieves that consciousness, can it be lost?
When one obtains that level of consciousness, it can never be lost. It can be clouded, but it cannot be lost. It can be covered over by improper knowledge and improper action. For example, the person who understands clearly that they must eat a balanced diet, and then one day something goes wrong in their life and they eat ice cream and cake nonstop for 3 days, has taken improper action, resulting in improper diet, which results in ill health. That person still has the awareness of proper knowledge and right action. They understood the reasons why it was necessary to have a balanced diet, but they've gone against that for some reason. So if a person slips, if a person goes backwards, if a person deviates from what they have arrived at, they haven't lost it. They have simply deviated or made a detour. This is why in empowerment training we do not consider sin as being real. There's no way anyone can commit sin. There's no way one should feel guilty, because anything that one has done can be changed and corrected tomorrow, barring suicide, barring death itself. But if one continues to live, one can change whatever one has done. One can even overcome the odds of, say, an amputated leg. We see every day people who have overcome the disability, who decided to empower themselves and to play basketball anyway, to run track anyway, to do it anyway, regardless of the physical process that may have been preventing them. We've seen people overcome mental blocks, people who couldn't read, who learned how to read and became top scholars, became heads of major corporate institutions. We have a mayor of Washington who barely could read as a child, came from a very impoverished family, but rose to become mayor of the nation's capital. We can see all this play out simply because when a person empowers themselves and works with those principles, they can slip, but they haven't lost the understanding. The knowledge is still there.
Okay, a student of empowerment, possibly much like a student or the exercise buff. When you first begin, he's really motivated. He wants to go out and he wants to knock the world out. But your student of empowerment wants to go out and literally empower everybody else and just roll them all over. What happens later when the motivation dies? How does one maintain that motivation? Are there techniques, meditative practices? Is there kind of like you go and you get recharged? Is that what happens during the intensives?
All those things that you said are components. The empowering process is an ongoing process, is a daily process. Meditation is a very core element of it, because we have to develop a strong mental battery. We have to develop a strong spiritual battery in order to be empowered. In order to take the stands that we have to take every day, we have to be centered in the self. That means going deep within the self, and we do that through meditation. We may do it through chanting, we may do it through prayer, we may do it through many other mechanisms. Meditation by far is probably one of the most profound ways to go to the self. It is in that process that we recharge, we rekindle. Now, very often people will go through despair or disillusionment and will be sidetracked for years, sometimes the rest of their life. All we can say is that an individual who sincerely seeks to empower themselves will find that the process does work. However, nature has an influence. And just like we know that an earthquake can devastate a city, no matter how well that city's been built, we know that events in our lives can devastate us. And therefore, if a tragic event occurs in our lives, it can shake us to the point where we slip from the very principles that we believe in and that we accept and that we work with in our lives. So, empowerment principles are not indestructible. They can be attacked, they can be obliterated by other forces in our lives. Therefore, we must guard these seeds and we must protect them. When we work with the empowerment process in an intensive, what we are doing is planting seeds of fulfillment in the consciousness. What we are saying is that no matter what happens, we are going to get what we want in life. And therefore, the fulfillment takes place because of the will of the individual. And it is through the will of the individual that no matter what the odds are, the person will obtain the victory, will obtain what they desire. Now, it doesn't mean they won't go through suffering, they won't go through pain, they won't go through all kinds of elements to get to that point. But they will obtain it because their will command it. If they have the will to live in a disease situation, they will empower themselves to live. But nature can affect that balance of the will. And therefore, if an unsettling event occurs, it can have an effect on the ability to pursue that empowered path. If, for example, you get hit by a car and you lose both legs, then maybe you can't fulfill that goal to be a basketball star because you don't have your legs to walk on anymore. But it doesn't prevent you from getting in a wheelchair and entering a basketball competition in a handicapped Olympics where you can shoot basketball from your wheelchair. That again says that if the will of the individual is there and the seeds are planted in consciousness, that person will obtain whatever it is that they seek in life. They just may not accomplish it the way they originally intended simply because they have lost certain instruments.
So the limitation isn't there then?
No limitation is there except the limitation of the instruments. We call these instruments 13 instruments. They exist as the intelligence, the mental faculties, as well as the action organs, that is the legs, the arms, the movement, as well as the sensory organs, the eyes, the nose, the ears. All these instruments, if they are in working condition, good working condition, give each individual an equal chance. Therefore, we view each individual as equal. If I take 10 children at birth, normal births, all have legs, all have brains, all have all the elements.
Taking 10 children from birth.
If we take 10 children from birth, we find that if each one of them are equal in all respects, same brain, same amount of legs, arms, everything is the same, no one is handicapped at birth, then those 10 individuals each have an equal chance to do whatever it is that they seek to do in life. What deprives them of that is the environment of limitations. That one may be born in a family that is too poor and can't afford to give the child the instruments